If only he'd known what was sitting in a trust account with my name on it. $329 million, quietly waiting, while my husband stood at the foot of my hospital bed and talked about leaving me like he was changing a cable subscription. The lawyer had called yesterday. His voice had been careful, almost ceremonial, like he was afraid to drop the number too loudly. "Ms. Evelyn Cole," he'd said, "your uncle, Harold, passed away last month. The trust is ready for you to claim." Uncle Harold, a man I'd met exactly twice, a man whose name I barely had space for in my memory, and yet he'd left me everything, because I was, apparently, the only family member who never asked him for money. I didn't even have time to process it before the door opened and my husband walked in. Victor. Perfect hair, crisp shirt, that expensive cologne that always made me think of elevators and cold conference rooms. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't squeeze my hand. He didn't even look relieved that I was awake. He looked inconvenienced. Behind him, the woman with him moved like she belonged here. Tessa Grant, the kind of attorney people hired when they wanted reality rewritten in their favor. Silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to. A smile so polished it didn't feel human. Victor's phone was already in his hand, as if he couldn't wait to get this over with. "Tomorrow," he said, glancing at the screen. I blinked, pain spiking behind my ribs as I pushed myself up against the pillows. Tomorrow? Victor finally met my eyes, and there was no shame in his expression, only impatience. "You've been unconscious for 3 days, Evelyn," he said flatly. "I can't put my life on hold forever." My throat went dry. "You couldn't wait a week?" Tessa's smile widened, almost sympathetic, except her eyes weren't. Her eyes were measuring. "Why wait?" Victor muttered. "We both know this marriage was over years ago." Then he said the part that was meant to cut deepest. "You're 42. You investigate insurance fraud for a living. You drive a Honda Civic. You shop at Target." He said Target like it was a disease. And standing beside him, already acting like she owned the space around my bed, was the woman he planned to marry tomorrow, in the same city, while I was still hooked to a heart monitor. And I just watched. Because right then, in the silence between my heartbeat and his cruelty, I realized something. Victor thought I had nothing. He had no idea what was about to hit him. My name is Evelyn Cole. I was 42 when my life split into before and after on a hospital bed that smelled like disinfectant and bad timing. People hear insurance investigator and imagine someone in a blazer flipping through paperwork. The reality is less glamorous. It's long hours, sharp instincts, uncomfortable questions, and learning to sit across from people who can lie with a straight face while their hands shake under the table. For years, I was good at that job because I was good at patterns. And yet somehow, I missed the most obvious pattern in my own marriage. I met Victor at a fundraiser downtown, one of those events where everyone speaks a little louder than they need to, like volume can replace importance. I'd been invited by a colleague who owed me a favor. Victor was there because Victor was always where power gathered. He wasn't rich back then, not really. But he had that hunger people mistake for confidence. He watched me with interest that felt flattering at first. Not sweet, not gentle, just targeted. Like he'd decided I was worth pursuing, and Victor didn't like leaving decisions unfinished. He offered to walk me to my car, asked me what I did. When I told him, his eyes lit up. "That's actually impressive," he said. "Most people don't have the stomach for that." I should have noticed how quickly he turned my work into a symbol, how he liked the idea of me being competent, sharp, useful. Like my stability made his ambition feel safer. But I was tired of dating men who needed rescuing emotionally. Victor didn't feel like a rescue project. He felt like momentum. We moved fast. Dinner dates turned into weekends. Weekends turned into him leaving shirts in my closet. Then one night, after too much wine and too much laughter, he said, "We're wasting time pretending this isn't serious." I remember the way he looked at me when he said it, like he was proposing a business merger, not a life. Still, I said yes. And for a while, it worked. Victor could be charming when he wanted. He'd kiss my forehead when I fell asleep on the couch with my laptop open. He'd bring coffee to my desk and pretend to listen while I vented about another fraudulent claim. He'd hold my hand in public like I was a trophy he'd earned fair and square. We got married within a year, 5 years. That's what the final decree would later reduce it to. At first, I didn't mind how different we were. I thought our differences balanced each other. I was methodical. He was social. I was cautious. He took risks. I liked quiet dinners. He liked rooms full of important people and expensive small talk. But slowly, Victor's networking became a lifestyle I kept paying for because that's what you do when you're trying to keep a marriage smooth, when you think love is proven through flexibility. I worked 60-hour weeks more than once. Not because Victor forced me, but because the bills always seemed to grow faster than the truth. The gym membership he needed. The dinners he couldn't skip, the clothes that mattered because appearances were currency in his world. And then there was the car. The white BMW Victor drove like it belonged to a version of him I was never allowed to meet. For 3 years, the payments came out of our accounts like a silent tax on my optimism. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He treated comfort like oxygen, something he deserved without discussion. The strangest part is, I didn't even resent it at first, because I believed in the story we were telling, that we were building something, that Victor's ambition was our future, that I was investing in a life that would eventually feel mutual. Then the little signs started. Phone face down, passwords changed, work trips with vague details, a new laugh in his voice when he texted, lighter than the one he used with me. He started making comments that sounded like jokes until they didn't. "You're so practical," he'd say, like practicality was a flaw. Or worse, "You wouldn't understand how these people think." And every time he said it, something in me tightened. But I let it go. Because I was loyal. Because I was tired. Because I didn't want to be the woman who overreacted. And because I truly didn't think Victor would ever do something as cruel as leaving me while I was unconscious. I didn't think he'd become that kind of man. But the truth is, he didn't become that man overnight. He'd been practicing for years. The first real shift didn't announce itself with drama. It arrived quietly, like a draft through a door I didn't remember leaving open. Victor stopped asking about my days. Not suddenly, not obviously, just incrementally. The way someone stops noticing a sound they hear every day. When I came home late, mentally exhausted from another deposition or field investigation, he'd already be dressed, jacket on, watch adjusted, phone in hand. "Client dinner," he'd say, already halfway out the door. At first, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Ambition was his language. I'd married a man who thrived on being needed elsewhere. But then the dinners multiplied. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And when he was home, he was absent. Physically present, mentally elsewhere. He'd scroll through his phone while I talked, nod at the wrong moments, laugh half a second too late. Once, I asked him who he was texting. "Work," he replied too quickly. Another time, I reached for his phone on the coffee table, innocently, to check the time, and he snatched it up like I'd reached for a weapon. I told myself it was stress. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that marriage wasn't supposed to feel exciting all the time. What I didn't tell myself was the truth sitting heavy in my chest. Victor was pulling away, and he didn't care enough to hide it well. Then came the accident. I don't remember the impact clearly, just headlights, too close, too fast, and the sound of metal screaming as my car spun. The rest was pain and darkness and a long, empty stretch where time didn't exist. When I woke up in the hospital, 3 days had passed. 3 days. I learned later that Victor had visited once, briefly, long enough to sign paperwork and ask the doctor when I'd be conscious again, long enough to know I couldn't stop him. The nurses told me he'd looked distracted, kept checking his phone, left before visiting hours ended. That should have been my first clear warning. Instead, I focused on recovery, on breathing through the pain, on reminding myself I was alive. Victor didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. By the time he finally walked into my room, with Tessa Grant at his side, I'd already spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering why my husband hadn't held my hand once since I woke up. Tessa didn't introduce herself. She didn't have to. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that doesn't ask permission. Her eyes scanned the room, not with concern but assessment, like she was taking inventory. I recognized her then. We had history. Professional history. 2 years earlier, I'd led an investigation that exposed one of her firm's biggest clients for insurance fraud. The case had cost them a 7-figure settlement and nearly earned her a disciplinary review. She'd stared at me across a conference table back then with the same composed smile, promising consequences without saying them out loud. Now she stood beside my husband. "Evelyn," Victor said, sighing as if my existence required effort. "We need to talk." Tessa nodded slightly. "I'm just here to make sure everything stays civil." Civil. Well, I was bruised, stitched, and still attached to a heart monitor. Victor didn't ask how I felt, didn't ask if I was in pain, didn't apologize for disappearing. Instead, he talked logistics, divorce papers, asset separation, moving forward. And the more he spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't impulsive. This was rehearsed. Tessa occasionally interjected, soft corrections, legal phrasing, gentle reminders, like a director guiding an actor through a final scene. Every word tightened the knot in my stomach, because suddenly so many things made sense. The late dinners, the secrecy, the emotional distance, the way Victor had stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as an obstacle. And standing there, watching the woman who'd once called me impressive dismantle my marriage with legal precision, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not despair. Clarity. Victor hadn't drifted away. He'd already left. And the worst part? He thought I was too broken, too distracted by pain to notice. He thought I wouldn't connect the dots. He was wrong. The moment that broke everything wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or thrown objects or dramatic tears. It came with a sentence spoken casually, like Victor was commenting on the weather. "I'm getting married tomorrow." For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. The machines beside my bed kept beeping steadily. My chest hurt when I inhaled. My mouth was dry, and my head still felt like it was wrapped in cotton. But surely I hadn't heard that right. "Tomorrow?" I repeated, pushing myself up despite the sharp pull along my ribs. Victor glanced at his phone again, already half checked out of the conversation. "Yes, tomorrow." Tessa shifted slightly beside him, adjusting her posture like someone stepping into a role she'd been practicing for weeks. "You've been unconscious for 3 days, Evelyn," Victor continued. "Life doesn't stop." I stared at him, at the man I'd built a life with, at the man who hadn't visited me, hadn't held my hand, hadn't waited until I could even sit up on my own. "You couldn't wait a week?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, thin, strained. "Just until I was awake?" Victor sighed, irritation flashing across his face. "Why would I?" That was the moment I felt something inside my chest go cold. "We both know this marriage has been over for years," he said. "You're practical. You understand that." Practical. I swallowed hard. "You're standing in a hospital room. I nearly died." "Yes, and I'm very sorry about that," he replied, the words empty. "But I need to move forward." Tessa finally spoke. "Victor didn't want to do this while you were incapacitated," she said smoothly. "But circumstances..." "Circumstances?" I cut in, my pulse hammering. "I was unconscious." She gave a small, apologetic smile. "Exactly. Delaying legal matters would only complicate things." Victor nodded. "You'll get the paperwork. Everything's already been filed." Filed. The word echoed in my head. Divorce papers. Filed. While I was unconscious. Something hot burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of them. "Who is she?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Victor didn't hesitate. "Tessa." Tessa inclined her head slightly. We've met professionally. Yes, we had. The memory came back with sharp clarity. A conference room, fluorescent lights, Tessa's controlled smile as I laid out evidence that destroyed her client's case. The way her jaw had tightened when she realized I wasn't bluffing. I looked between them. How long? Victor hesitated for half a second. Long enough. Tessa's gaze flickered, then settled back into composure. 6 months, Victor said. 6 months. My grip tightened on the bedsheet. So while you were still sleeping next to me, I said slowly, you were planning a future with her. He shrugged. You weren't really present anymore. That was when he said it, the line he'd clearly been saving. You're 42, Evelyn. You investigate insurance fraud. You drive a Honda Civic. You shop at Target. Each sentence landed like a calculated blow. I need someone with ambition, with connections, with money. Tessa didn't contradict him. She didn't have to. Then the door opened wider, and for a brief, surreal second, I thought more people were coming in. Instead, it was just a nurse checking vitals. And standing there, bruised, stitched, abandoned, I felt something shift, not collapse, solidify, because I suddenly saw it all with brutal clarity. Victor hadn't just fallen out of love, he'd upgraded. He'd traded loyalty for optics, and he thought I was too weak, too injured to push back. He thought I'd lie there and accept it. But as I watched Tessa's carefully neutral expression, as I felt my heartbeat steady instead of racing, one truth rose above the pain. Victor believed I was powerless, and that belief was about to cost him everything. After they left, the room felt too quiet, not peaceful, hollow. The door closed with a soft click, and the sound of their footsteps faded down the hallway, like the end of something irreversible. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, indifferent to the fact that my marriage had just been pronounced dead at my bedside. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, at the tiny crack near the corner tile, at the fluorescent light humming faintly above me, at my own hands resting on the thin hospital blanket, hands that had signed forms, built cases, held people accountable for years, hands that now felt strangely disconnected from my body. Shock doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like stillness. I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. My mind kept replaying Victor's words on a loop, stripping them of emotion and examining them like evidence. You're 42. You shop at Target. I need someone with money. Was that really what he saw when he looked at me? I thought about the nights I came home late, bone-tired, and still cooked dinner because he had a meeting. The weekends I spent reviewing case files while he networked. The BMW payments I'd authorized without discussion because it made his life smoother. Had I been practical or convenient? A nurse came in to check my IV. She smiled kindly, asked how I was feeling. I'm fine, I said automatically. The lie tasted bitter. When she left, I finally turned my head and looked at the small table beside my bed. There was a stack of papers there. Divorce papers. Already served. My name printed neatly at the top, like this had been just another transaction. I picked them up slowly, my fingers trembling. Not from weakness, but from the effort it took to stay composed. Victor was asking for half of everything. Half of the accounts. Half of future earnings. Half of a life he'd already walked away from. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Future earnings. As if he'd earned the right. I set the papers down and closed my eyes, finally letting the weight of it sink in. I asked myself the question that comes after every betrayal. What did I miss? The answer came quickly, and it hurt. I missed the moment when love became leverage. I missed the way Victor's admiration had slowly turned into entitlement. The way he'd stopped seeing my work as impressive and started seeing it as a resource. The way he'd grown resentful, not because I lacked ambition, but because my stability made his insecurity louder. And Tessa wasn't the beginning. She was the symptom. A woman who represented everything Victor thought he deserved. Status, connections, polish. Someone who looked good standing beside him in rooms where image mattered more than loyalty. I pressed my lips together, breathing through the ache in my chest. I didn't lose him, I realized. He revealed himself. That thought didn't erase the pain, but it gave it shape. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then it rang again. And again? Finally, I answered. Yes? My voice was calm, controlled. Evelyn, Victor said, sounding almost nervous. We should talk. I closed my eyes. We already did. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Of course you did, I replied softly. You planned it. That's not fair. Neither is filing for divorce while your wife is unconscious. Silence. Then quieter. You're being emotional. That word. I almost smiled. Victor, I said evenly. I investigate insurance fraud for a living. Emotion is what people use when they don't have facts. He didn't respond. I'm tired, I continued. We'll communicate through lawyers. He exhaled sharply. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm waking up. I ended the call and turned my phone off. For the first time since I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, I felt something other than pain or confusion. Resolve. Victor thought the worst was over, that I'd absorb the blow quietly, sign what was put in front of me, and fade into the background of his new life. He had no idea what I'd just been given. No idea who I actually was when I wasn't trying to keep the peace. And lying there, listening to my own steady heartbeat, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't rage. I wouldn't chase. I would let the truth do what it always does when it's handled correctly. I would let it destroy the lie. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, quiet ones at first, like pressure building beneath a surface that still looked calm. 2 days after Victor walked out of my hospital room, I received the first voicemail from someone who wasn't him. Evelyn, a woman's voice said, overly gentle. It's Marina, Victor's mother. We need to talk, family to family. I didn't return the call. The second voicemail came that evening. You're being unreasonable, Marina said, the softness gone. Victor is under a lot of stress. This divorce doesn't have to get ugly. The word ugly made me smile faintly. By the third day, I was discharged and home, alone in a house that still smelled like Victor's cologne and unspoken resentment. I moved carefully, ribs aching, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. That was when I logged into our joint accounts, or tried to. Password changed. I didn't panic. I documented. Within an hour, I had confirmation from the bank. $60,000 withdrawn while I was unconscious. No notification, no discussion. Half of it transferred to an account I didn't recognize. The name on the transfer cleared any remaining doubt. Tessa Grant. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. Fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee that went cold, untouched. So this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. And Victor hadn't even tried to hide it. The calls escalated after that. Victor's sister left a message accusing me of destroying the family. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted to say I should be the bigger person. Even a mutual friend suggested marriage counseling, as if therapy could fix a man who emptied accounts while his wife was on life support. Then came the visit. I heard the knock before I saw them. 3 women stood on my front step like a coordinated unit. Lena, Brooke, and Sonia, Victor's social orbit. Women who'd smiled at me at dinners, complimented my cooking, borrowed my things, and whispered behind my back. Well, Lena said brightly, stepping inside without being invited, you look better. I didn't offer them seats. What do you want? I asked. Sonia folded her arms. Victor's devastated. That almost made me laugh. He's heartbroken, Brooke added. He didn't expect you to react like this. Like what? I asked calmly. By not rolling over? Lena sighed theatrically. You're being bitter. You've always been rigid. Rigid. Because I expected fidelity? Because I expected honesty? You should forgive him, Brooke said. He made a mistake. Mistakes don't involve bank transfers, I replied. They exchanged glances. Sonia stepped forward. He was trying to protect his future. With my money, I said. Silence. I could see them recalculating, trying to adjust the narrative now that the numbers were real. He loves you, Lena said weakly. No, I replied. He loves what I provide. They left soon after that, offended and empty-handed. But the real escalation came that night. My phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Evelyn," a familiar, smooth voice said. "We should talk." "Tessa." "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I said. "I disagree," she replied. "There are misunderstandings." "I'm sure you'd like to call them that." She paused. "Victor is under the impression that you'll fight this." "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm documenting." "That could get messy," she warned. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "For people who lie." She inhaled slowly. "You should consider the optics." "Interesting advice," I said, "from someone with outstanding debts to my firm." Her silence was instant and telling. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said carefully. "Oh, you do," I replied. "The fraudulent claim last year, the unpaid fees, the damages, $230,000 plus interest. That was settled." "It wasn't," I said calmly, "and my records are thorough." She exhaled. "Evelyn, this doesn't have to become adversarial." "It already is," I replied. "You slept with my husband and took my money." Another pause. "You don't want to make enemies," she said quietly. "I investigate fraud for a living," I said. "Enemies are part of the job." I ended the call. That night, lying alone in the bed Victor used to occupy, I felt the last trace of hesitation leave me. This wasn't about salvaging a marriage. It was about accountability. Victor and Tessa had assumed I was injured, distracted, emotional, easy to maneuver around. They assumed wrong. By morning, I had scheduled meetings with 3 lawyers, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted precision. And somewhere between the legal language and the quiet strength returning to my body, I felt it, the internal shift, the moment when grief stopped being an anchor and started becoming fuel. Victor had chosen escalation. I was simply going to finish it. The lowest point didn't come with chaos. It came with silence. 3 nights after the lawyers were retained and the bank statements printed, I sat alone on the living room floor, my back against the couch, the house dark except for the light from my phone. 17 missed calls. Victor. 5 voicemails from his mother. 2 from his sister. 1 text that simply read, "You didn't have to ruin everything." I let the phone slip from my hand and rest face down on the carpet. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, the weight hit me all at once. Not anger, not humiliation. Loss. I had lost the version of my life I believed in, the future I thought I was quietly building, the man I defended in rooms where people questioned his integrity, rooms where I'd said, without hesitation, he wouldn't do that. I thought about the nights I'd waited up for him, the dinners reheated twice, the way I'd ignored the tightness in my chest every time he chose someone else's schedule over our life. I wondered when loving someone had turned into slowly erasing myself. And for the first time, doubt crept in. Not about what Victor had done, but about whether standing my ground was worth what it was costing me. Because strength is loud in theory. In practice, it's lonely. The house felt enormous that night. Every room held memories. Some good, some now poisoned. The spot on the counter where Victor used to lean while scrolling his phone. The chair he always claimed. The garage where his BMW used to sit, polished and smug. I pressed my palms to my eyes, breathing carefully, ribs still aching. What if I'm wrong? What if this is just pride? What if walking away costs me more than staying? Those questions are dangerous in the dark. I didn't sleep. Sometime around 4 a.m, my phone lit up again. A voicemail notification. I played it without listening to the name. "Evelyn," Victor's voice said, hoarse, raw. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I was scared. I thought you didn't need me anymore." I closed my eyes. "I didn't know how to be important in your life," he continued. "Tessa made me feel relevant. So my near-death experience wasn't enough to keep him loyal. "I know I hurt you," he said, "but we can fix this. Please, don't do this." The voicemail ended, and for a moment, a brief, dangerous moment, I almost believed him, because grief has a way of blurring lines, of making familiarity feel like safety. I stood up slowly and walked into the bedroom. Victor's side of the closet was empty now. He'd cleared it out while I was unconscious. Efficient, thorough, like everything else he did when it came to exiting situations. On the dresser sat something I hadn't touched since I got home, my wedding ring. I picked it up, turning it slowly between my fingers. 5 years. 5 years reduced to a circle of metal. That was when the truth finally settled. Heavy, but clean. Victor wasn't scared of losing me. He was scared of losing access. Access to stability, to money, to a life where he didn't have to be accountable for his own ambition. He didn't want me back. He wanted the version of me that made his life easier. The realization didn't make the pain disappear, but it stripped it of confusion. I went back to the living room and sat down again, this time reaching for my laptop. Not to cry, not to scroll. To review. Bank records, legal filings, timelines. Facts don't lie. And as I reconstructed the sequence of events, withdrawals, meetings, calls made while I was unconscious, I felt something solid return to my spine. Resolve doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it shows up quietly and says, enough. By sunrise, I hadn't slept, but I was clear. Clear that this was the bottom. Clear that from here, the only direction left was forward. Victor had abandoned me at my weakest moment. I would not abandon myself now. And as the morning light filled the room, I made the decision that would change everything. I wouldn't just walk away. I would walk away with the truth intact and let the consequences fall where they belonged. The turning point didn't come from anger. It came from evidence. 2 days after the night I spent on the living room floor, my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected. Robert Hale, the senior attorney my firm trusted when things needed to be airtight. I went through everything you sent, he said without preamble. Bank records, timelines, medical reports. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across documents spread like a paper map of my marriage. And, I asked, there was a pause on the other end. Not hesitation. Wait. Evelyn, Robert said carefully. Victor didn't just behave badly. He crossed legal lines. My grip tightened around the phone. The withdrawals while you were unconscious, he continued. The timing of the divorce filing, the transfer to Tessa Grant, none of it looks incidental. I closed my eyes. I already suspected that, I said. I just didn't want to say it out loud. Well, Robert replied, you don't have to anymore, because there's more. That was the moment everything shifted. Tessa Grant, he said, isn't financially secure. Not even close. I straightened. She owes your firm over $200,000 from a prior fraud case, he continued, plus interest. She's been dodging collections for months. That matched my own records, but hearing it confirmed out loud made it real in a new way. And Victor? I asked. Robert exhaled. Victor is leveraged, deeply. His lifestyle doesn't match his income. The joint withdrawals were likely meant to cover shortfalls. I looked down at the paperwork again. So they weren't just leaving me, I said quietly. They were planning to use me. Yes, Robert said, and there's something else. I felt my pulse spike. Go on. The inheritance, he said. I went still. Your uncle's trust, Robert continued. Because it was finalized after the divorce filing, and because Victor had no knowledge of it prior, it is not marital property. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Say that again, I whispered. Legally, he said, Victor has zero claim. So does Tessa. The money is yours, entirely. I sat back in my chair, the weight of weeks, months, lifting in one clean, undeniable motion. $329 million. Protected. Untouchable. Waiting. And suddenly, I understood the full shape of the situation. Victor hadn't left because I lacked value. He'd left because he miscalculated it. He thought I was predictable. He thought I was small. He thought he could take what he wanted and walk away clean. The irony almost made me laugh. Because the one thing Victor had never understood, never truly respected, was my profession. I don't react. I investigate. I don't explode. I document. And I don't need to raise my voice to take control of a situation. I need facts. That afternoon, I met with Robert in person. We reviewed everything again, slowly, carefully. I signed nothing emotional. I agreed to nothing reactive. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. Are you sure you don't want to negotiate? Robert asked gently. Many people would. I shook my head. No, I said. I want clarity. He nodded. Then here's the path forward. Victor would receive nothing beyond what the law required. The divorce would proceed without concessions. And Tessa Grant? She would receive a formal demand for repayment. Immediate, enforceable, unignorable. I walked out of Robert's office feeling lighter than I had since before the accident. Not because I was rich, but because I was no longer confused. Victor and Tessa had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had assumed kindness was compliance. And now, standing on the other side of certainty, I finally saw myself the way they never did. Not as a wife, not as a resource, not as an obstacle, but as the person with the leverage. And I was done pretending otherwise. The fallout didn't explode, it collapsed. Quietly, publicly, irreversibly. It started with a letter. A formal demand for repayment was delivered to Tessa Grant's office on a Tuesday morning. Certified, documented, impossible to ignore. $230,000. Fees, damages, interest. A deadline that didn't negotiate and didn't care about excuses. I didn't call her. I didn't warn her. I didn't need to. By noon, my phone rang. Evelyn, Tessa said, her voice clipped, stripped of its usual polish. We need to talk. No, I replied calmly. You need to pay. This is retaliation, she snapped. This is collection, I corrected. You've had 8 months. Silence. Then quieter. You're enjoying this. I thought about that for a moment before answering. No, I said. I'm finished with it. I hung up. Victor's unraveling came next, not because I confronted him, because the world he'd built couldn't support the truth. The bank froze additional accounts pending review. His credit lines tightened. The comfortable narrative he'd been telling himself, that he'd leave me, marry up, and move forward, started to fracture under scrutiny. His mother stopped calling. His sister sent one final message asking if we could talk like adults. I didn't respond. The man who'd once dismissed me as unambitious suddenly found himself explaining financial inconsistencies to people who didn't care about charm. Meanwhile, Tessa's problems multiplied. Her firm began asking questions. Creditors resurfaced. Quiet whispers followed her into rooms where confidence used to be enough. She tried once more. Showed up at my door. I watched her through the window before opening it, how her shoulders were stiff, how her posture had lost that effortless superiority. Evelyn, she said carefully, we can resolve this. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. We already are, I replied. You don't have to ruin me, she said. Victor's gone. I'm not with him anymore. That's irrelevant, I said evenly. You took money that wasn't yours. You owe a debt. This isn't personal. Her jaw tightened. You're cold. I met her gaze. No, I'm fair. She left without another word. Victor tried once more, too. A text, not a call. I didn't realize how far this would go. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. He still didn't get it. This wasn't something I was doing to him. This was something he'd set in motion when he decided my life was disposable. The divorce finalized quietly. No dramatic courtroom scene, no speeches, just signatures, stamps, closure. Victor didn't contest the settlement once it became clear he had no leverage. No inheritance, no claim, no angle. The man who once mocked my Honda Civic walked out of my life with exactly what he'd earned. Nothing extra. The last time I saw him was outside the courthouse. He looked smaller, older, like someone who'd misjudged the cost of his choices and was now paying interest. He didn't speak. Neither did I. I walked past him without slowing down. And that was it. No revenge speech. No final argument. Just the quiet satisfaction of walking away intact. That night, I went home to a house that was finally mine, alone. I didn't celebrate. I didn't drink. I slept. Deeply. For the first time since the accident, since the betrayal, Since the moment my life cracked open, I slept without fear because the truth had landed exactly where it belonged, and I didn't need to chase it. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I stood alone on the balcony of a small rental overlooking the Pacific. The ocean was calm that morning, wide, steady, unapologetic. The kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you are and refusing to be anything else. I held a mug of coffee in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. And for the first time in a long while, my thoughts weren't tangled around Victor or Tessa or betrayal. They were quiet, not empty, peaceful. The inheritance paperwork was complete. The trust was secure. Numbers that once felt abstract, millions stacked on millions, now sat quietly in accounts I barely checked. Not because they didn't matter, but because they no longer defined anything I needed to prove. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't change my name. I didn't reinvent myself for the world. I kept my job. I kept investigating fraud, sitting across from people who thought they were smarter than the truth. Because I liked the work. Because it reminded me who I was, long before anyone tried to reduce me to what I could provide. Occasionally, I heard updates. Victor moved on quickly, because men like him always do. New circles, new stories, less stability than he pretended to have. Tessa left the city not long after settling her debts, quietly, without announcements. No one won in the way movies pretend people do. But I did win in the only way that actually lasts. I didn't lose myself. What I learned, what I want you to hear if you're listening to this late at night, wondering if you're overreacting or imagining things, is this. People reveal who they are when they think you're powerless. Pay attention. Love doesn't abandon you in a hospital bed. Love doesn't empty accounts in silence. Love doesn't ask you to shrink so someone else can feel bigger. And strength doesn't always look like rage or revenge. Sometimes strength is quiet. Sometimes it's walking away with your dignity intact. Sometimes it's choosing clarity over chaos. Victor thought my value was measurable. Tessa thought power came from proximity. They were both wrong. My value was never in what I had. It was in what I refused to tolerate. As the sun rose higher over the ocean, I took a slow breath and smiled. Not because everything had been perfect, but because it was finally honest. And that, I realized, was freedom.